Hello, hello. What is up? Facebook, YouTube, friends. We're just getting rolling here. We're back. AskNick show, back again. Summer 2023. It's June 13th. It is Tuesday. It's been a while. It's been a busy, busy time. I'm just going to give you some updates before we jump into it. I'll let you know what's going on, what's coming up. So I'm sure you probably know by now, but we've got a new record out. It's called Dreams, Visions, Illusions. It looks like this. It's a new record. This one's for Glenn Zaleski. That's why it says Glenn on it. That came out in April, and we're really excited about that. Came out, and just a couple weeks ago, we launched the extended version. So if you've enjoyed listening to the record and you want to hear it in its full version, you can go and check it out on streaming. Dreams, Visions, Illusions Extended. It's in 3 movements. It's got all the pieces kind of conjoined together as they were originally conceived, and it was a lot of fun to put together. I've been kind of deep in my own shed here, kind of practicing, working on some projects for next year, and I just finished the first draft of a brand new book. This is the rough draft. You can see it's a textbook, and it's called Frameworks for Jazz Improvisation, Bebop. It's kind of the culmination of a couple of years of teaching an improv class, and so working on that. So you can see how long it is. So that's why I've been where I disappeared to, basically from the middle of May until now. But yeah, those are my updates. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad to be here with you all. And as always, drop in those questions, comments, etc., and we'll jump right in. Okay, first question, right off the bat: how do you deal with comparing yourself with others? There's 2 things I think about, and I've answered this question before in the past. I think there's 2 ways to think about it. And there's a positive way and a negative way, and it can be used both ways. So in general, comparing yourself to other people is generally a negative because it's all kinds of stuff that's outside of your control, like whatever anyone thinks about you, it doesn't really matter. You got to kind of figure out what you want to do and kind of go for your goals and go for the things that are going to make you feel contented and peaceful and feel like you're contributing something to the world in the way that you want to do so. So I think that comparing yourself can be negative in that way, especially when it's your peers, right? And I see this sometimes with my students getting into this, mind game with other students and feeling this kind of way. However, I do think it's important and helpful sometimes to compare yourself to other people when you're thinking about how to measure is not a good word, but how to position yourself within a market or position yourself within your peer group or within the scene, or within like the global scene, kind of like what are the skills you need to have, who are the type of players that you need to associate yourself with to be able to play the types of gigs and perform in the types of situations that you want to be able to do so in. You know what I mean? So what I mean by that is sometimes we need to know what skills we need. So you think about like who you're going to sub for on a gig. So when I was in New York, I used to sub a lot for Michael Davis, the great trombone player, plays lots of, he used to play with the Rolling Stones, plays lots of shows and sessions. And so I knew going into those situations that I needed to compare my skills to his skills and know that I needed to be able to do the same sort of things that he did myself. So I found that super useful to be able to kind of direct my practice in a way where I was able to focus on and level up those particular skills and those skill sets rather than just kind of being totally blind and just kind of hoping that it worked out, So I think comparing can kind of be good and bad. It can be really helpful in certain kind of ways, but otherwise you just have to focus on yourself. If you're too worried about what everyone else thinks, you can only judge your musicianship by like getting back into it, doing and practicing every day, sticking to your schedule, hitting your goals. That's all you can really do. What everyone else thinks is not super important. So I hope that's helpful to you. So will you be doing an in-person jazz trombone boot camp? I'm not opposed to doing that, but I would need to know that there are several people that would want to do that. So if you are one of those people and you would be interested in attending a jazz trombone boot camp in person sometime, somewhere, let me know. Probably need about, I haven't done the math, but probably, 10 to 15 people that are interested to come for a week somewhere. And could be at UNT, could be somewhere else. Yeah, if there are people that are interested in that, we could definitely do that. It probably wouldn't happen this summer, but it'll probably happen next summer. I kind of put the Jazz Trombone Boot Camp on hiatus. We did 3 years in a row. It was really a lot of fun. But I had some other priorities to get to this summer, which includes this book that I showed you a second ago, this book that I've been working on. I couldn't do everything at once. You try to do as many things as you can, but can't do everything at once. And so I had to kind of let some things go. And that was one for this year, but I would love to get back to it. So if that is something you want to do, you should let me know. And I will, if I get enough inquiries into starting the in-person Jazz Trombone Boot Camp, we will do it. What's the best way to buy used trombones, specifically jazz trombones? Well, I get a lot of people sending me emails saying that they have horns that they're trying to sell. So one, go to a really good music store that has a lot of jazz trombones. In New York, there was always in New Jersey rather, there's a good store called Dylan's. So if you can find a store like that to go to, that's number one. Go to a store where they have really great trombone inventory and you can check it out. Number two is you should contact teachers in your area and see if they have any connections to anybody that knows anything. I have 5-6 emails in my inbox right now of people that say like, oh, I have this horn, I'm trying to sell it. Do you have any students that are interested? So I would try to get it from somebody local, somebody you trust. Reach out to some people. I know some people that have some horns they're trying to sell. So if you're looking for something, send people a message. Send me a message. When you are judging trombone competitions and auditions, what are you looking for in a player? Well, I'd say that those are two different things for sure. Competitions and auditions, definitely different. What am I looking for when I hear a competition? I'm looking for a trombonist that has a strong sense of the history of the music, a strong sense of the instrument, and then from there, it's a strong sense of communication, and then a strong sense of musicality. For me, the musicianship and the musicality are a little bit more top of my priority list when I'm listening to a competition. I want to hear that there's the potential of that player developing into an artist, and that means having a unique point of view, but it means also that it's not someone that's just coming out of the woodwork and playing totally random stuff. So that's what I'm looking for. And then there's a certain technical element to it, right? There's like proficiency, but I don't expect like mastery, especially if it's a competition for a younger age group. That would compare differently to an audition, right? So an audition, you're kind of looking for, when I say audition, I feel like audition is like, whether it's an audition for a competition or it's an audition for like school, those are going to be a little different, because if it's for a competition, that's kind of where I'm at. Like usually when I'm listening for audition for a competition, I'm just kind of like, could this person be a finalist? But for school, when I'm looking at having someone join us at UNT, for example, in our studio, it's a combination of like, does this person want to study jazz? You'd be surprised at how many people might audition for a jazz program, but actually they're not super interested in jazz. They just don't want to play classical music and they want to come study jazz. So for me, it's super important that the person is on the same page. So an audition for school, you want to make sure it's a good fit between the teacher and the student. So that could be different based on who the teacher is at a different school. So you will have to apply this to whoever it is that you're auditioning for. But for me, that means you want to study jazz trombone. If you don't want to learn jazz standards, transcribe solos, get better at the language, play tunes, play in different ensembles, that sort of stuff, like it's not a good fit. If you want to play more pop and commercial styles and you have no interest in jazz improvisation, then we're not a good fit. If you want to be a jazz artist but also be able to work and do those things, then we're a good fit, because I'm going to make you deal with those things. How do you balance playing language with actual interaction while improvising? That's a good question. That's exactly what this book is about. It'll be a free book once it's out, so you can check it out. It's going to be a textbook, an open textbook through UNT. It's a complicated but simple concept and answer, which is that you can't be thinking about the language when you're improvising. You have to be thinking about the playing of the music, which means that your understanding and your development within the language has to be to the point where you're able to execute it without thinking. Because if you're thinking about it, there's no chance that you can think about the music part, let alone interacting with the other musicians or shaping the music or any of that sort of stuff. You're stuck in the, what chords do I play, or what scales do I play over these chords, and things of that nature. So for me, the balance is you have to internalize the language. Internalize means you play it without thinking. It means you've practiced it so many times that you can't play it wrong. Not you've practiced it a few times and you can play it correctly. You cannot play it wrong. There's a huge, huge gap between those two things. A huge gap. And most people never cross the gap. And that's why they struggle, because they don't put in the time to actually internalize the language. And so then they're always constantly stuck up thinking through the chord changes and going in a loop over and over again. And they can't ever focus on making music or interaction. And when they try to, it's very forced sounding, and it sounds like them parroting back what was just said. It doesn't feel like a natural conversation. It feels like people repeating one another, which is not musical development. That's just parroting. It's just mimicking. How do you know you are doing things that are bringing you closer to your goals? Oh, that's a good question. I think the most important thing you can do to make sure that you're making progress towards your goals is having goals that have measurable progress built into them. So if your goal is to get better at the trombone, that's really not very measurable. But if there are specific skills, you can measure specific skills, because you can measure tempos, you can measure the amount of minutes, you can build up a streak of consistency with practicing. You can have tunes you're learning, or solos you're transcribing. There can be very measurable things. People call them SMART goals, right? Your goal has to be measurable, and you have to be able to break it down. And if it's not, you need to find components that make up that goal. So maybe it feels like a very esoteric goal that you have, where, it's pie in the sky kind of stuff. But what are the components? I usually call them stepping stones. What are the stepping stones that are going to get you to that goal? You can't just get from here to being Christian Lindbergh in one day, or to being John Coltrane in one day, or 1 week, or 1 year. And so you got to kind of make sure that you're establishing habits that will build up to and iterate on your successes so that you can reach your goals. So breaking them down, working backwards. It can't be just forever, and it can't just be any random amount of time. It has to have some measurable. I'm going to practice every day this week, and then this week turns into this month, which turns into this year. Well, I think one of the most important things you can do as a young musician is just practice every day. Don't take a day off, at least for an hour, or at least for 15 minutes. It's the consistency over time that gets you to where you're trying to go. And what horn are you playing these days? Same horn, playing a King 3B Plus, which is a 525. I got the bell cut back in January, and trying to get a new slide because my slide is worn out. Yeah, I like the medium bore. I just made a new record on it a month ago now. Wow, time flies, man. Could you talk about how to find a good mouthpiece? I'll just start with what I play. So my mouthpiece is a Marcinkiewicz 6ES. I found it when I was playing in Edwards a long time ago, when I was in college. The Marcinkiewiczes are a little bit on the lighter side in terms of the mass of the mouthpiece. So it was a good fit with the Edwards that had a satin finish, so it needed a little bit more like of a light mouthpiece to counterbalance the kind of darkness you get when you put that satin finish on the bell, and it's heavy and all that sort of stuff. So I don't play that anymore. However, I play the same mouthpiece because I am a consistency person. I do not like to switch mouthpieces that much. I have a mouthpiece for my large bore tenor that is pretty similar. I had the Marcinkiewicz guys pretty much make the same rim on a different mouthpiece, so it kind of feels similar, but it's for the old Con shank. I have an old Con 88H, and so from the 60s, so it's got that old shank. It's not the regular new shank. But so finding a good mouthpiece is a number of things, right? It's comfort, it's playability, it's sound, and it is response, and it has to balance well with the horn that you're playing, and you have to feel good about it. So I think consistency is the number one thing, right? And then everything from there is kind of what you're optimizing for. And so some people will argue with me about this. I optimize for sound. So does it sound better? Does it sound more close to the sound I am imagining in my head, right? It's not like, does it feel comfortable or does it feel easy? Some people go in that direction. Does it feel easy to play? Does it respond quickly? Is that what you're looking for? Right? So any mouthpiece can be good. It just depends what you're optimizing for, and what you're trying to get to. A larger mouthpiece is not always better. It has to do with your physiology, like how big your chops are. Like, do they need more space in the mouthpiece? Do you play really relaxed? Do you play a little tighter? Do you play with a lot of force? Do you want a cup that's more like a V, or do you like the bowl cup? Do you want to feel the resistance coming back at you, or do you hate that? So good is so relative. But I think people tend to play things that feel easy and sound bad. And I tend to do the opposite. So I'd rather have a mouthpiece that's difficult to play because I can get used to it if it sounds the way I want it to sound. As a professor of jazz trombone at UNT, what advice do you have for aspiring jazz musicians looking to pursue a career in music? It's a complicated time, I think, to pursue a career in music. I think it means a lot of things. And I think having the flexibility to understand that it does mean a lot of things, and it can mean a lot of things, and that there are many different ways to be successful with a life in music is important. And I think going in with an open mind is important, that there's not only one way. You don't only have to be a freelancer. You don't only have to be a performer to have a life in music, that's for sure, or to appreciate music. One of the most negative experiences that I see people have because of the intensity with which certain programs have, and it's not just one school, it's many places, is that they're so focused on the goal of saving, for lack of a better word, the music, because they feel like it's on the decline or whatever, that they don't focus on having people enjoy the music. And it becomes this negative reinforcement loop where they're never good enough, they can never reach their goals, their teachers are always negative, people get burned out from the music, basically, is what I'm saying, because people are super intense and they don't think about the fact that people actually have to enjoy this thing that we're doing. It can't just be for the sake of doing it. Someone has to enjoy it, right? And so I think that sometimes we lose sight of that in jazz education and we burn people out. And then they're turned off from the music forever, which is extremely negative, and it makes it so that there are less people that want to have a life in music because they're like, I can't do this. I don't want to be a performer if this is what it's like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So I think that it's important to have that open mind, think about the different things as you go into pursuing a degree in music, or especially jazz music, keeping your options open in terms of all the different ways you can make a living, which means performing, which means performing in things that aren't jazz, right? So maybe those are wedding bands, maybe those are Broadway shows, maybe those are other recording kind of situations, maybe it's playing other types of music that is not jazz, right? And figuring out where you want to live on the spectrum of jazz and not jazz, and there's something that you learn as you go. It's just the more artistic the music is, the more artistically satisfying it is, probably the less percentage of your time versus income, it's usually a pretty small amount, just because of the nature of art and the nature of economics. And even though we want something to be a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is that way. It's a tough thing to kind of grapple with, and I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just saying you have to be realistic about what things are. And so having the skills to do that, or I have some friends that, they're producers now and they work in pop music and they do great things with their jazz background. And then, maybe for other people, they want to do something that's totally outside of music, to support their jazz musician lifestyle of playing that music by having another career, and that's not something to look down on, even though it tends to feel that way from inside, that people would look down on you for doing those sort of things. So this is sorry for this complicated and rambling answer to a seemingly a simple question about advice for young jazz musicians. But you kind of have to get into the right headspace and the right frame of mind before you can even think about, making that life in music. Because if you only think it's one thing, you're going to be driven insane by trying to achieve that goal, realizing that once you've achieved it, that it doesn't come with the things that you wanted it to. Like you reach success in one area, but it doesn't mean that the rest of the areas of your life are also equally far along, on the scale. So keeping your mind open, learning as many skills as you can, developing your skills I always talk about as a craftsman, a craftsperson, in addition to your artistry. So the craftsperson is the skills you need to execute anything musically, to function as a working musician. And then your artistry is your artistic point of view. It's what you have to offer the world, right? It's what you're offering, why someone should listen to you instead of somebody else, all of that kind of stuff. I think it's really important to distinguish between the two and to be able to have something to offer in both lanes. How much do you play with your students' lessons? Do you think students prefer hearing you play or rather just listening to them and critiquing? I don't know what the students prefer. I think playing with them is important. I think sometimes maybe they think that I play too much. I don't know though. I'd have to hear from them, or maybe they want me to play more. I think people like to play with the teacher. I always liked playing with my teachers. Like I play piano in my lessons to kind of force them to have to play with better time, because my time is not as good on the piano as playing trombone, right? And my skills are not as good, but like they still need to sound good when they play, so forcing them to play with piano. But then I also like to hear them just play like by themselves, like with nothing, whether it's tunes or transcriptions or etudes, stuff like that. It's a constant balance, I think. Many musicians are self-producing these days. What value do you think signing with a label provides? The label has to provide something, right? I think the label provides a sense of community. I think the label provides expertise. I think the label provides support with marketing and support with promotion a lot of times. I do not think most labels are helping with money most of the time in terms of investment. It's really hard to go alone, like it's never ever easy to go it alone, and it's never been easier to release music by yourself, right? Like it's never been easier. It's super easy. All you got to do is go on CD Baby or DistroKid and put in your stuff. But then it becomes one in a sea of thousands that come out in a day, right? So, with our label and the services that we provide for our artists and for other artists that aren't on the label as well, we're providing support and expertise and customizable plans and being able to support a release with marketing information and all these other extraneous things that you can't or maybe don't even know about, as an individual. That's the context of what the label provides, All right, how much of your practice is with a metronome? There was a while it was 100% all the time. Now maybe not so much of a percentage, but I think you go through cycles until you can hear a constant tempo versus a non-constant tempo. I would advise using a metronome all the time. If you feel like your tempo is shaky, use the metronome all the time. And when you use it, it's important to make sure that you're playing with it, that you are creating the time and it's marking the time along with you, rather than relying on the metronome to give you the time. I hope that you can kind of start thinking about that differentiation, like playing along with the metronome and it's telling you, it's checking you, rather than like I'm playing with the metronome and it's telling me where the time is. Those are two different things. Any tips on applying licks to different songs? Yeah, you have to first understand what the lick is, like what makes it, theoretically, like analyze it. Where can it fit? Is it a 2-measure 2/5? Is it a 1-measure 2/5? Is it a blues phrase? Is it diminished? Is it augmented? Is it altered? Is it kind of knowing what those things are and then putting it into the context of another tune? So what I like to do, say it's a 2/5 line, is to it's a 2 measure 2/5 line is find a tune that I know super well that I want to apply it on. So if it's we can apply it on a blues, put it on bar 9 and 10, right, of the blues, 2, 5, 1 at the end. And so then I will kind of imagine that, the first 8 bars of the chorus are freely improvised. And then bars 9 and 10, I'm playing the written lick or the predetermined lick. And then in 11 and 12, I improvise again, right? And I do this 10, 15, 20 courses until I can easily incorporate that line or phrase into my playing. So the trick here is that you can't just like play random stuff and then jump to the line and then play more random stuff. You're trying to think about it as like a jumping off point or as a impetus or as a goal, right? You're leading us to that line. So you have to play similar vocabulary to get in and out of it, and so you do it over and over and over and over again. I'm curious what your warm-up looks like on the day of a gig. Is it any different than any other day? Sometimes it can be tough to find that line of getting everything going, also not doing too much. I have a warm-up that takes about like 5 minutes. So for me, I can do a warm-up the same as any other day because it's warm-up. But if I'm going to play my whole routine, maybe on a gig day, I'm not going to play my whole routine. And then if I have time for the whole routine, I'll do the whole routine. And the warm-up is going to hit on the 3 things that I need to hit on, which is sound, flexibility, and articulation. Sound, flexibility, articulation. Those are the 3 things. And so if I have time, I'm going to do 1 of each of those. If I have more, maybe I can do 2 of each of those. But that's how I think about it. So I try to combine them together so I can work on sound and flexibility at the same time, sound and articulation at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of work to combine those together. I think that's a good way to go in terms of developing these different parts of your routine. And I think that in school, your routine gets longer and longer and longer because your different teachers tell you different things to do. And you do it additively rather than non-linearly, like taking stuff out, replacing stuff with better exercises, if that makes, you want to keep replacing things with better exercises or more effective exercises to reach your specific goals in that moment. That's exactly what this Go routine was about. Was last summer. I had not practiced much in the spring before, and I had some big gigs at ITF and some other things coming up, premiering my piece last summer. And I was like, I need to get a routine together that's going to kick my butt and actually get my crap back together. So that's what I had to do. Was put together a new routine that focused on that growth mindset. Do you feel like the best teachers are those with experience? And do you recommend to having some sort of professional experience as a musician before going into teaching? Okay, this is a 2-part question. Do you feel like the best teachers are those with experience? Yes. The answer is yes. You want to have a teacher that has the experience that you want to glean from, right? You want to study with someone that knows something about where you're headed, I think. Especially the further along you get in your journey. Now, to that point, I think a very important part of your development as a player is to teach. Because I think when you start teaching, you have to find ways to explain things in a new way to other people. That is extremely valuable for your own understanding of how things work and how to get better yourself, how to be your own teacher, all that kind of stuff. And so you start teaching. And so I encourage my students to start teaching as soon as possible because you're always at least one day ahead of somebody else, right? At the very minimum, if I start a trombone today and you start tomorrow, I'm at least one day ahead of you, right? But so when I have high school students, I tell them to teach elementary school students. College students, go teach high school students, and then college students have to teach other college students. They have to teach people coming back to their instruments after a lot of time, some amount of time away in another career, something like that. But always having some teaching in your back pocket. I don't know of too many people in this current instrumental music climate that don't teach at all. There are some, but not a lot. Most everyone teaches in some form or fashion. So I think it's important to start doing it at a young age because it takes a long time to develop an opinion, a perspective, to get good at it, for lack of a better word. It takes just as much shedding in teaching, and it comes through time teaching and being in front of students and trying to problem solve. If you want to teach at a high level, then you probably should have some experience with jazz performance. However, that does not mean that everyone who is a great pedagogue is also a great player, or vice versa, that every great player is a great pedagogue. So there are tons of things you can learn from a great pedagogue that does not play or does not play the style of music that you play. So it's all a balance. How do you define your style as an educator? Are there any specific tools you use to encourage growth? I don't think I know how to define my style as an educator. You might have to ask my students about that. And I don't think there's like a word you can just use to just like, oh, I teach this way. I can tell you what my style is, which is we're going to learn jazz. No, you have to have the foundational skills to be able to function in a musical environment. So to me, that's sound, flexibility, articulation, like I mentioned, talking to Brian a minute ago. And then from there, you need to have relevant expertise, musical expertise within styles. And then when I think about it is I need to be able to play anything. So what do I need to practice to play anything? Okay, to development and encourage growth in the students. Got it. So it's literally anything. So if I hear something, an exercise somebody plays on Instagram, I transcribe it and I bring it into my students. If I think back to my time studying with Steve Turay and there was a hard exercise, I bring it into my students. If I think about stuff I did with Wycliffe Gordon when I was in high school, and I still can't play, I try to bring it into my students. And so I'm always trying to give them something that's a step ahead of where they're at, giving them some guidance to get there, but always it has to be harder than where you're at or else you're not going to grow. If you always play an F blues, you're never going to get better at playing countdown, right? So you got to play stuff that's harder than what you need to be able to play to function. Like you don't need to be a master of countdown to be a great jazz musician, for example, or giant steps, or insert whatever tune you want, or you don't have to play at 400 BPM to be a great musician. You do have to have things that are challenging you in a variety of ways. So that means reading, that means understanding harmony, that means being able to play stylistically, that means having a functional range up, high and low, it means having a good sound and a good sense of style, in all those ways. So what do you do to get better at sight reading? You sight read all the time. And you sight read with people that are good at sight reading so that it holds you accountable. So if that means rehearsal bands, that means just saying yes to as many rehearsals as you can to go sight read music all the time. And holding yourself to a high bar is super important, that you're going to play it right. You can get, books and charts and transcriptions and play along with them and try to get them right. But the thing is, you got to do it every day. And it all comes from the rhythms, recognizing the rhythms. There are some other books you can kind of check out. Louis Belson has a sight reading book, but generally you just need to sight read all the time. But I tell my students this all the time. You just have to decide you want to be good at sight reading. All right. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. We've been on for a while now. My voice is starting to get hoarse. It's been fun to reconnect with you all. And I hope to see you all in person soon. And we'll catch you later. Have a good one.